1.1.1. One thing that was happening was my novels were just growing and growing and growing. 1.1.2. If I was ever going to finish one of them, what I needed was something that would limit the scope, restrict my freedom somewhat, so I wouldn't keep adding new characters, creating new subplots, filling in ever more backstory whenever I saw an additional complication or motif or theme that could add depth to the subject matter of the novel I was working on. 1.1.3. Another thing is, I fell for the title. One point 1.4. This may not be a recipe for successful novel writing. Recipe, noun. 1. Medicine. A formula for the composition or use of a medicine, a prescription. A medicine prepared according to such a formula. A remedy. Also figurative and in figurative contexts. 2. A statement of the ingredients and procedure required for making something, now especially a dish in cookery. 3. In extended use, a means, procedure, or plan for attaining or effecting some end. Also, a state of affairs or set of events which is likely to lead to a particular outcome, now frequently in Recipe for Disaster.
An artist should ruthlessly destroy his manuscripts after publication, lest they mislead academic mediocrities into thinking that it is possible to unravel the mysteries of genius by studying canceled readings. In art, purpose and plan are nothing. Only the results count.
1.1.5. Wasn't it almost too obvious, coming out of the Great Recession, so many people saddled with homes that were worth far less than the remaining principal, and with everyone calling those mortgages upside down or underwater? 1.1.6. Couldn't that be the reason I kept looking around for someone else to write that book, to use that title, and kept not finding it? Because it wasn't almost too obvious, it was too obvious. This may not be a recipe for successful novel writing. 1.1.7. Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground is a short novel. 1.1.8. It might more accurately be called a novella. 1.1.9. This fact could prove helpful to me. 1.1.10. I could use Dostoevsky's book as a blueprint. 1.1.11. Notes from Underwater felt like a clever title. 1.1.12. Don't mirror my mistake. 1.1.13. Think twice in committing to something because it's clever. 1.1.14. Then think a third time.
How many times?
1.1.15. I'm being somewhat disingenuous, with my tone if not with my words, because what I'm not saying is that I didn't stick with this book just because the title was clever, or because I perceived it as topical, even if that topicality was fading as the economy seemed to improve and the people that could moved on with their lives. I didn't write the first draft of this novel in a fever and then revise it every day in mostly hardly less of one, and then spend all that time wholly committed to trying to get it published, despite how being in the mind of this caustic narrator warped my perceptions and then my mood, leading to an almost vertiginous sense of freedom when I finished my revision. I might even call it elation, which feeling diminished as the rejections came first as a light shower and then in a deluge that left me when the floodwaters receded on a lonely island of despair. I didn't persist in the writing because of some misguided commitment to cleverness or topicality or to the form of the literary confession. Don't mirror my mistake. 1.2.1. How do you relate to a being who hasn't perceived what it means to need to create a story, that it is conceivable to be completely seized by that need? 1.2.2. Should I compare it to the obsession of a bad love, or the impulse of a gambler to risk more than he can lose? Or is it closer, at least in this case, to the way a mind can return to and endlessly reenact a trauma, with the most likely unintuited hope that eventually, in one of the cycles of remembering and reliving, order can be imposed on the chaos of experience and free the mind from the grip of shock and pain.
I don't know where I am or who I'm with, but I'm not at home. I'm staying at a hotel, and it's like a business conference or something. I don't know what, maybe a self-improvement comes to it, I don't know. And my brother comes to stay with me. Is it like to visit or see me or something? And he's like trouble for me. Maybe like a kind of get rich quick kind of loser. And kind of schemer who always loses. And while I'm out one time, he gets himself killed by like little bad guys. And for some reason it makes sense to me to clean up the body, get rid of the body, and like try to clean up the room. And I'm like picturing a scene where I picking up a gun, grabbing a gun with like a handkerchief, like they do in TV shows. Similar stuff, and I feel like maybe I like came up with some money in the situation. I don't know how. Like I found where he stored the money. I'm guessing there. I don't remember that. That would have been part of why it was like smart to hide the body, right? Because otherwise I would have had to give the money back, I'm guessing. But then I'm like going out, and I think I'm like making little hits. But at a certain point, it occurs to me that like I have to report that my brother's missing, and what am I gonna do? Like, how am I? Like, you can't report that you get rid of a body, And there was a lot of like, what am I gonna do? And thinking about it, like going along with my original plan, even though I knew it wasn't a good one. But I also feel like I was like, I don't know, was I like taking out some criminals, some professional criminals who were like working against my brother and maybe me now? I have like a feeling of like cleaning up another crime scene. I'm realizing like playing ignorant to the cops is going to be hard to do. And I don't know what to do about it.
1.2.3. One difference with the novel is sometimes it works and you can eventually be done with it. 1.2.4. This isn't where I wanted to get to yet though. 1.2.5. Where I was in my story was near the inception of this idea for a novel, which, once I committed to it, gelled into a plan quite quickly. 1.2.6. The reason I wrote the book was obviously not that I thought it would leave me in despair. 1.2.7. The reason I wrote the book was I reckoned I could make it great.
A lot I don't remember from last night, but one was that I was like making decisions about my life and taking me away from a PhD. Maybe it was a PhD, but I was treating it like it was a bachelor's. And I was talking to my dad. I was like, is it all right if I don't get a sweatshirt? And it's like, what do you mean don't get a sweatshirt? Like, what sweatshirt? I'm like, because I don't have a degree. And he said, I think it depends on the sweatshirt. But along with this, my friend Irene, her book was coming out and it got pulled at like the last minute, and it sounded like she had decided. But the name of the book was Gender Justification Meets the Margins, which I thought was a nice title.
1.2.8. I am not here trying to explain what greatness might mean. 1.2.9. You just have to know that this thought was there at the start.
It's not enough to go through it. You gotta go through it. No, you're going through it.
1.2.10. It's important to know that because without understanding it, the first blow can't make sense. how devastating it was. This would be relatively early in the revisions, when I read Vladimir Nabokov's Lectures on Russian Literature. Devastating, adjective. That devastates. Frequently figurative, especially in trivial or hyperbolical use. Very effective or upsetting. Astounding, overwhelming, stunning. 1.2.11. Even for me, the person who went through it, it's a bit difficult to recollect how severe a blow it was to read that book, how it shook my faith in my project to the very ground, how much will I had to summon up to soldier on with the revision, and how costly that expenditure of will may have been, overshadowed as it is from my current vantage point by the far greater blow to my confidence, loss of faith, and emptying out of hope that still at that point lay in the future. 1.2.12. We form relationships with some of the writers we read, and I suspect Nabokov is one whom very few read without forming such a relationship. And for me it's a strong, though complicated one, as I can't help but admire the artistry nor be intimidated by the mastery, the complete control he seems to exhibit over his material. And yet just these admirable qualities point to my issues with him, seem actually to flow from the same source, his aristocratic manner, which lends an icy sheen to his prose and persona, provides the foundation for a powerful arrogance, and grants some unapproachable quality that gives his pronouncements such unquestionable authority. 1.2.13. For what it's worth, the writers I truly love, the writers I fall in love with, and this is a thing that is difficult to put into words, both because it is always hard to describe the things we feel most passionately about, and because even as we say it, we do so with the foreknowledge that we will always eventually fall short of our ideals or betray our claims in this, if not every, arena. The writers I really fall for give me the impression not of chess masters dispassionately deploying their pieces around a board, ever certain of victory, as Nabokov does, but seem more like individuals standing alone before a deadly blaze with nothing but a fire hose blasting its inexhaustible supply of water, with a force too great for their merely human capacities, summoning every bit of their strength and will and ingenuity as they grapple with this heaving, unpredictable conduit of potentially life-saving fluid, trying to wrangle the hose and guide the water to where they think it might do some good, risking their footing and their dignity and even their lives, stranded in their desperate humanness between these overwhelming elemental forces, even though they know they're too weak to compel the water to do what they want, and probably too late to save the building anyway.
Dostoevsky's lack of taste, his monotonous dealings with persons suffering with pre-Freudian complexes, the way he has of wallowing in the tragic misadventures of human dignity, all this is difficult to admire.
1.3.1. Do you also see the seeds of my undoing in the way I talk about the writers I love? Undoing, noun. The action of bringing to naught, destroying or ruining. The fact of being so dealt with. The state of being undone. Also, with an instance of this.
This is exactly. Fuck, it's that fucking awareness.
1.3.2. Nabokov's critiques landed in my psyche. 1.3.3. I had modeled my novel on vulgar, sentimental pseudo-literature. 1.3.4. I had committed myself to creating, by recreating, trash.
My difficulty, however, is that not all the readers to whom I talk in this or other classes are experienced. A good third, I should say, do not know the difference between real literature and pseudo-literature, and to such readers Dostoevsky may seem more important and more artistic than such trash as our American historical novels or things called From Here to Eternity and such like balderdash.
1.3.5. The morning when I first read Nabokov's condemnations of Dostoevsky, my cheeks burned in shame. 1.3.6. How I had made such a terrible error, I couldn't be sure. 1.3.7. It's not as if I had never heard more or less this said of the Russian before. 1.3.8. It was that I had been able to dismiss it. 1.3.9. The reason I could dismiss it was that I had not committed to modeling anything after Dostoevsky, and so hadn't yet made myself vulnerable.
The repetition of words and phrases, the intonation of obsession, the 100% banality of every word, the vulgar soapbox eloquence mark these elements of Dostoevsky's style.
1.3.10. A period of darkness lasted for some time. 1.3.11. I hope I have previously communicated to some extent what it was like. 1.3.12. I will not linger on the subject.
Great works of art pass through us like storm winds, flinging open the doors of perception, pressing upon the architecture of our beliefs with their transforming powers.
1.3.13. Have you ever found just the right book at just the right time? 1.3.14. Did it help you cope with a loss or inspire you to undertake a project when your commitment was wavering, or provide a crucial and timely insight, or demand that you change your life? 1.3.15. With something as important, at least at the time, as this was, why can't I remember how I came across George Steiner's Tolstoy or Dostoevsky? 1.3.16. Having found it however I found it, and having finished the first sentence, how could I not have had the feeling that it might free me?
In Dostoevskian fiction, the tragic sense of life, in the old manner, is wholly renewed. Dostoevsky is one of the great tragic poets.
1.3.17. For a time I was saved, and I was able to continue revising my novel, not as the interminable Sisyphean penance I was forced to pay for allowing my poor literary judgment to be compounded by hubris, but with enthusiasm and excitement, and even an inkling that what I was creating was something that could find a place in the world. 1.3.18. This renewed vigor allowed me to finish the novel, to surf the peaks and troughs of my energy and confidence, to persist in the consideration, evaluation, and confirmation, or correction, of each one of the 90,000 or so words in the book, even when it seemed as if the task would never end, even carrying me through the deflation I felt after I thought I was done and my first reader suggested a major adjustment I should make to the protagonist's motivation in part 2, a suggestion I took and which turned out to be a good one. 1.3.19. I knew the novel was dark, knew that large segments of the book reading population weren't as interested in sneaking up to the edge of the abyss and peeking over as I was. Maybe even realized that I had followed perhaps too closely the advice you hear so often as a writer to write the book you wish you could read. But I also thought it was pretty smart and well written, and funny, however black the humor, that the inquiry into the financial system of the 2000s that ultimately went so wrong would be a point in its favor, that it was a book that didn't compromise, and that this lack of compromise would be appreciated. 1.3.20. It did not take me long to discover that my most optimistic hopes would be disappointed. But it took me quite some time to understand that my least optimistic forecasts would also be disappointed.
The letters from the underworld embody both a philosophic myth, the rebellion against positivism, and a psychological myth, the descent of man into the dark places of the soul.
1.4.1. I don't see how I can say it except simply. 1.4.2. I thought I succeeded. 1.4.3. I was convinced I succeeded. 1.4.4. The novel was what I had wanted it to be. 1.4.5. The world was not interested.
I was making this massive trek, mostly by car it seemed, and like it just felt like it was going on forever and ever and ever and ever. And through mostly through all parts of the country, but it wasn't a city thing. It was like it seemed to be hitting like rural places and like parks, state parks, things like that. And at the end, there seemed to have been like a walking part, and I was with some like tell experienced people. So women, it looks like, and one woman said it. I think she said like without being judgmental or something, but it looks like from your equipment. I think it looks like from your gear that this might be the most serious or most difficult or biggest trip you've ever taken. And I said something like, well, I did the boundary waters, but between that and the next there's a big gap, and this is definitely in there. Something like that. But I don't know what the ultimate goal was. Was I like seeing the country? Was I trying to get someplace? Because if I was trying to get someplace, then why was I driving all that way and then going here?
1.4.6. If there is a happy ending to this story, or if a happy ending is asking too much, because it probably is, then maybe a lesson to be learned or some small wisdom I might acquire or impart, even if it's only the knowledge that acceptance is possible. It is still well ahead, perhaps still to come in the second part of this lecture, certainly not yet realized in the life of the operator. Because as the rejections came in by the dozens and confidence dimmed to hope, which was recast into the possibility that I might get lucky, which devolved into the knowledge that there would be no good result, defeat and humiliation took up at least a semi-permanent residence in my psyche. 1.4.7. I had failed before, often when the odds of success were far better. Many times when the hoped-for result would lead to a greater happiness than it would in this case. And I will certainly fail again, and yet never before, and I can only hope never again, had a failure dismantled so thoroughly the ad hoc framework I had constructed, a framework unique to me in design and materials, but similar, I imagine, in its objective to the ones most of us build, that allows me to find some sense of meaning and purpose in this life I daily live. 1.4.8. So I spent my time in the pit, often in bafflement, occasionally wallowing, periodically seized by a determination to escape. And I can't say that I'm certain I've escaped, but what I can say is that it has become important to me to understand why this failure had the effect on me it did.